Hi, it's Sunil here. Welcome to the November edition of Camp Lead On. Thank you so much, first of all, to Todd and Adam for inviting me to present back in the summer, I believe. So even back then, when they asked me to present, what does effective K to 12 math instruction look like? That's something I've been thinking about almost every day as an educator ever since I started teaching. But when they posed that workshop idea for this Camp Lead On in November, it made me think really hard about what I could say, how I would say it, how I could frame it in a 20, 30-minute conversation. As you can see, I'm wearing my sweatshirt. It feels like, we're going camping. It's maybe late at night around a campfire. That's the kind of conversation I want to have. So let's maybe think about the most micro idea of effective K to 12 instruction, the most micro idea, and think about something which has been one of our universal kind of requirements in mathematics. It's not even debatable. Is about the actual fluencies, factual fluency, for example. I remember when I grew up, you have to know your times table, right? So, for example, 6 times 7 is 42. And to know that, that's, factual fluency. But really, we want to think about other fluencies as well. We want to think about procedural, and we want to think about conceptual. So instead of thinking about 6 times 7 is 42, how about you think about, you break down the 6 into its primes, because 7 is already prime. So 2 times 3 times 7 is 42. See, that's a more important math fact now, because one, the number 42 has been broken down into its prime constituents, the building blocks, the atoms of mathematics in terms of numbers. And now kids can build their own math facts in the family of numbers that multiply to 42. So for example, once a student has broken down the number 42 into 2, 3, and 7, ask a student to pick a number. Okay, let's say they pick 3. Well, the other two numbers which are left are 2 times 7. That's 14. 14 times 3 is 42. So they can keep doing this with the primes and basically create all their math facts for 42. You see, there's a very subtle difference in terms of going from 6 times 7 to 2 times 3 times 7. But by doing the 2 times 3 times 7, you get your factual fluencies, you get your procedural fluencies of breaking down numbers into their primes, prime factorization, which kids learn around middle school, and then the conceptual fluency of how all these numbers, 2, 3, 7, are related in terms of multiplying to 42. So it's just one little extra step, but it actually does it really nicely. So, first thing which I think is important for effective K to 12 math instruction is braiding together these fluencies. So let me give you one more example, because it's going to involve not just the factual, procedural, and conceptual, but one kind of mystery fluency, which I will talk about at the end, or towards the end. So what if you have a question like 2 take away 5? 2 subtract 5. I mean, most of us know that as a math fact as minus 3. Even kids who start to learn negative numbers. But look at this presentation of 2 subtract 5, in which what I've done is actually access the historical way in which the mathematician Brahmagupta, around 620 current era, gave us the primer, the rules for working with zero negatives. So I added 0 to 2 subtract 5. You don't change anything by adding 0. That's a key concept. And kids learn 0 pairs somewhere else. Do they learn it here in with negative numbers? This is a great place to introduce it, because I can add any form of 0. But why did I choose plus 3 minus 3? Because I'm like the 2. And maybe this is the voice you want to have too. It's like, oh, I don't have enough to take away. I got 2 cookies. There's 5 people. Whatever kind of situation you want to use. I wish I had 3 more. I wish I had 3 more. So if you wish you had 3 more, well, why don't you write a 3? But you just can't arbitrarily put in a plus 3. There also has to be a minus 3. So there's that 0 pairing. And now you're going to have that 2 plus 3 is 5. You got to take away 5. Well, 5 take away 5 gives you a 0. There's that key 0 appearing again. And then what you're left with, the residue, is minus 3. So there's no number line here. There is a rich idea of adding 0, 0 pairs, having some flexibility of doing whatever you want, but make sure you compensate as well. So I would say, sort of the number one idea, which I think we can all agree upon, is that you want to bring all your fluencies in mathematics, including one which, again, I said I'll talk about at the end. That's why it's got the question mark in terms of fluencies. So that was the micro. Now we're going to kind of pull out. So we're going to go a little bit more macro. And the next one is going to seem almost counterintuitive to the sort of clarity I gave a solution. If you would ask me when I started my career, this would have been the ideas I have for effective K-12 instruction. And maybe I wish I could go back to my younger self and somehow build a time machine and send this recording to him as he's starting his career. But that's not how life works, and that's okay. We're on a journey. We learn things. So the next thing that I'd like to talk about is delight your students with confusion and failure. That's a pretty strange sentence, right? Delight's a great word, but then what comes afterwards is confusion and failure. And so the idea of confusion and failure sitting in that means that it must be important to mathematics. And it is. If you look at school has been about traditionally how fast can you get an answer right? Or it has to be done by the end of the period, or it has to be done by end of the week, or some sort of restriction timeline, and you've got to be correct, right? We're getting better, but that's generally been the narrative. But that's not the narrative that's been around for thousands of years in mathematics. Mathematics has been about slow failure. If someone asks me what is mathematics about, it's about slow failure. And that's the narrative, which I think is so human. That's something we can all do. So, like if students are, when you present a topic, use your voice, use your inflection to go, okay, what's going on there? Like, speak from an average student's point of view who is maybe, sits back at the back of the class. How would they think? Say things like that. Say things like, are we allowed to do that? Does that make sense? I'm not sure we can. Like, create this doubt. That is really important in terms of our presentation of mathematics, because that's the natural human response. You don't always have to be on to be correct. Every move has got to be correct. Every step has to be correct. Yeah, not only do we learn from our mistakes, but mistakes have been, again, I guess this sounds like, almost like, a broken record, but it's also accessing how every single person studied, explored mathematics. Like, blind alleys, locked doors, stumbling, fumbling, bumbling around the dark. These are all things which have been said by the most prominent mathematicians. And, speaking of prominent mathematician, in terms of supporting this idea of, delighting your students with confusion and failure, Joel Bowler, who we all know, put this post out on Twitter, I think back in September. And she's quoting one of my favorite mathematicians, Bertrand Russell, who was, such a huge mathematical giant, but also, was a great writer. And, he basically summed up mathematics. If you look at that quote, we don't know what we're doing. That's what mathematicians, when they approached a topic or an idea, it's that uncertainty. And that is so human. And I think that is like the way that, Joe Buller tweeted that, with enthusiasm. So let's share our enthusiasm with our students, with that sort of doubt, uncertainty, confusion, failure, because it also builds in the empathy too, right? Students go, well, I can actually react like this from a SEL point of view, from a social emotional learning point of view. Absolutely. Bring it on. Bring your A game of doubt and confusion into the classroom. And as a teacher, please allow that. And I'm sure for many of you that might be one of the easiest things because you have your own doubts about mathematics and uncertainties. Look, when I first started teaching, and maybe some of you can sort of relate to this, I only assigned the questions that I could do. And I was teaching calculus in my first couple of years. They gave it to me quite early. So, I always wanted to stay 1, 2 steps ahead of the students. So I only assigned the questions that I could do. Well, by the end of my career, I basically assigned every single question. And I think you probably can anticipate what happens. Students would ask me a question. Hey, Mr. Singh, can you do question 17? Like one of the hard questions at the end. I didn't even bother to look at it, try it. I wanted to do it like raw, first time, in the classroom with them. But there's a huge amount of trust and safety that has to be built in. It took me a while to build that courage that I know I was going to fail. I think once in a blue moon I got one of those tough questions right, bing, 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 like right away. But quite often I'd be stuck and not sure what to do. And then the students would pick up the baton and they would have more incentive to tackle this problem because there was a true communal celebration of mathematics and of mathematics to be a human endeavor. So kind of surfing that in terms of, and all of these ideas, I think, I use the word braided for the fluency. So I think all these ideas are braided. They come as a package. I don't think you can untangle them and pick one or two. And I knew that when I thought about them, but I also knew that they were all accessible. If we're going to talk about equity for mathematics for our students, we also have to think about equity for teaching. What ideas are accessible? And I think all these ideas are accessible. So the third one, and this is, I'm kind of paying homage to Dan Finkel, who's got one of the best videos on math education on TED Talk. I think it's the most watched one now. But his third bullet point is kind of my third bullet point. His third bullet point was, you're not the answer key. That's not your responsibility. So I'm just going to more or less make that more explicit. Your job is to not so much provide the answers, to be a source of answers. You should be a source of questions. So I know a lot of us are now doing remote learning, distant learning. In your chat boxes, it shouldn't be quiet. I know it's hard, but there should be like just questions coming left, right, and center. There should be questions like students might ask, can you divide by 0? Is there such thing as negative infinity? Why do you flip and multiply fractions when you were dividing them? All these things which you may or may not have the answer for, but you're creating a curious environment where students are asking these type of questions, right? They're asking these type of questions, and if you can create the environment where every single day your students, whether you're teaching them most likely in a remote situation or maybe it's hybrid, every single day they leave more curious. That is the only benchmark I use. I use it for my own kids too. I make sure, like, are you okay? Are you happy? That's right now in our, the time period that we're going through with the pandemic. We should have a really sort of small number of check boxes. Mental health, is that okay? But if we're going to get into the sort of abstract ideas of effective K-12 instruction, I would say that we need to make our students curious every single day about mathematics. Let them carry the energy, and how we can do that. And one of the ways is definitely by being a person who inspires to ask questions. And you don't have to have the answers for them. You don't have to go on Google the night before, make sure that you've memorized it. Be human with your mathematical learning wherever you are. Whether you're a seasoned high school teacher or whether you're a first year, third grade teacher who comes from an arts background. We can all up our game with mathematical content and pedagogy, but our humanness is the most important thing. So we're kind of getting more macro, sort of more philosophical, but that's really, I think, also of the times, right? So getting, again, like I said, more macro, and I've said the word humanizing. Well, I think we need to rehumanize mathematics with storytelling, right? We all have stories to tell. I have this image which I've created for presentations, and I'm doing a keynote in November for the New York State Math Conference, which is called Storytelling, the Journey of Rehumanizing Mathematics for All. That's a pretty loaded sentence, right? Storytelling, rehumanizing, because mathematics is already human. Journey, it doesn't matter where you are, we're all on a journey. And for all. Like, that's for everyone. Everyone should be on this road. And, there's three types of stories. We all have stories within ourselves about, just our own experience with mathematics. The good, the bad, the ugly, warts and all, Share them with your students. And I'm sure your students have stories too of their struggles, of their anxieties. Have those be shared. And the third component of that, and like I said, I have this visual where I have these sort of three rings. They're called Bromian rings. If you take any one ring out, the other two rings fall apart. So the story of the whole storytelling is the story of yourself, the story of your students, and the stories of mathematics. Like, that is a rich repository in terms of how to build in storytelling. And the more stories you tell, the more you rehumanize mathematics. But what also occurs is now you have more of a sense of belonging, more of a sense of belonging and identity. Because if you allow stories to be heard, there's a really good quote by Simone Weil, who's the brother of Anton Weil, who was a famous French mathematician in the 30s. And she has got some wonderful quotes, but I just came across this one, and this is so germane to this storytelling. She said that giving your attention, just like all of you are right now, you're giving your attention to me, is the purest and rarest form of generosity. Think about that. That's mighty powerful, to create this sort of generous classroom of storytelling and mathematics. But I said the word belonging, right? Remember I said belonging? What's the opposite of belonging? It begins with letter A. It's alienation, right? Why did I bring that up? It's because the other A word is the one that gets all the spotlight. Anxiety, math anxiety, which can start as early as second grade, but students will try to keep it, buried, and spend a lot of energy keeping it like so their parents and their teachers cannot see it. And we know math anxiety is a huge, huge problem, especially by middle school. It causes a lot of trauma, a lot of self-esteem issues. But remember the other A word I just said, alienation. Alienation is the precursor. It's the precursor to math anxiety. It's almost like math anxiety is the metastasis of alienation. By the time it gets anxiety, it's almost too late. There's a lot of, just to be very transparent, forthright, damage that's been done because of the way that we've taught math under this pressure, under this system to be correct fast. And I'm going to get to some of these points right at the very end. But alienation. Once students don't feel like they belong in math, they check out. And they check out, they start missing some key points. And, there's gaps now in understanding. So students don't, it's not they don't like math because it's hard. Students don't like math because it's boring, and or they don't feel like it's for them. It doesn't reflect who I am. So that again goes back to the rehumanization part, the storytelling part. Every single race, culture, civilization, tribe has explored mathematics for its own purposes at that time. There has been not one group of people that has not explored mathematics. In fact, the origin of mathematics, if you want to go right down to its core, is Africa. With the discovery of the Ishango bone, which is, I think it was in the 60s, which has all these notchings on it, which indicates some sort of keeping track of the cycles of the moon, phase of the moon. They found another bone, looks like similar to that, called the Lubombo bone recently, which is 35,000 BC in terms of its dating. There's a lot of indigenous fractal design in African culture, in their embroidery, in their social hierarchy, in their jewelry. Go Google a picture of the Ethiopian cross, which is like, over 500 years old. It looks exactly like the fractal antenna inside of cell phones. So yeah, sure enough, I was listing some points, but I was trying to convey all those ideas in the form of a story. And, we don't have a lot of time, but I usually do tell stories in my workshops and presentations. And when you hear a story, that's a key thing too. The auditory part, the human part, the talking part. I know we've read some stories about math, or we know some math history, we've read it, but to actually hear someone tell a story. Don't we all love stories, a good story? And mathematics is full of good stories, which reflect every single one of our students in our classroom. It doesn't matter what their background is, we can find a story or math stories which reflects the humanness and the curiosity of all our students. So that brings me to, I think, the last point. And this is the one which is very specific to 2020. All the ones I've mentioned so far are very emergent themes. Where we talk about math history and storytelling in 2015, probably not, more in the periphery, but it's definitely become more focused, the idea of storytelling, because of the focus on equity. So to have the widest lens on equity, diversity, and inclusion, we need to look at stories and storytelling in math history. But now that we're in the throes of a pandemic, so many things which are losing their currency, we need to leave behind. And one of the things we definitely have to leave behind, and now some of these things are not in our control, is standardized testing. We went a year without it. We're still okay, right? So it looks like standardized testing will still be around, but it's not going to have the same value it did maybe back 20, 25 years ago, when we had this almost unhealthy, stressful performance culture in learning. This performance culture, this idea that it was all about just me as an individual. Where am I going to be? What kind of job am I going to get? And those are still important. I don't believe in the word or, that's binary. I believe in the word and. So what else is the pursuit of mathematics about? It's about just our own sense of where we are in the world. It's our sense of belonging. It's our sense of curiosity. It's just our natural wonder. So, and I've been doing some remote learning too. I'm sure you have as well. So one of the things I like to fold in, especially in this sort of, what are we going to leave behind? Let's leave behind, the pressures of testing. Let's leave behind, so much homework being assigned. Let's leave behind the competitive idea of learning mathematics. Let's leave behind maybe what students can learn, when they can learn it. Let's reevaluate our topics. And let's embrace the newness of our environment that we have. I'm 56 years old and I left the classroom 7 years ago. But this classroom, the virtual classroom, I like it because I get to reinvent myself. I get to learn new things. I get to make mistakes. I get to fumble around in front of my students. Towards the end of my career, I was getting really good at my craft and most of my lessons were like, pitch perfect. Now I get to stumble and fumble again. I get to close tabs I'm not supposed to close, and my students, like, in the chat boxes, are going to say, Mr. saying, refresh or hard refresh. I love that environment. So use this new environment to sort of be reinvigorated. I know it's been a struggle, especially with a lot of sort of administrative pressures, but think about who we really are at heart as a teacher. We're learners. Let's model that. Let's embrace the newness. Let's embrace the equity where every student is looking at the same screen. Hopefully they have screens, but if they do have screens, you don't have a student way at the back who might not be able to see. Everybody has the same vantage point. So there are a lot of pluses. We can build community. We can get to know our students through the chats. We have this technological divide now. We're not together as this, leadership camp would have been. But let's then compensate for that divide. That means we have to be more human. And that means we have to tell more stories. And that sort of feels like I'm going back into the core of what effective K-12 instruction looks like. So, the last thing I'd like to say, I don't want to stop this conversation now. Please feel free to reach out to me. Follow me on Twitter at MathGarden. Email me at rightanglemath@gmail.com. Let's continue the conversation, and hope you have a great November with the other workshops, and this has been a blast. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Oh.